Huge protests in Belarus, huge uncertainty too, this amid widespread calls for the country's authoritarian president, Alexander Lukashenko, to step down. The protests follow a presidential election that the opposition and the EU says was fraudulent. Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years, but his people are saying enough is enough. And if Europe's longest-serving leader does go, what impact will the growing crisis have on neighbouring Russia and its authoritarian leader, Vladimir Putin? So, on to the point, we ask Belarus protests, how will Putin react? Well, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on To The Point. And my guests in the studio are Belarus-born Olga Dryndova from the Research Centre for Eastern European Studies at the University of Bremen. She says active support for the wounded Belarus leader would only damage Russia. The mood in Minsk is neither pro-Russian nor pro-European. Also with us is Gesine Dornblüth, expert on Russia and Eastern Europe and a former Moscow correspondent. She says it's almost inconceivable that Russia would simply tolerate a democratic turnaround in Belarus. And a warm welcome too to Deutsche Welle's own Vladimir Esipov, who is from DW's Russian desk. He argues that so far nothing has happened in Belarus that Putin really needs to react to. An interesting comment. We'll come to that shortly. First of all, though, Olga Dryndova, dramatic events in your home country. Are we seeing the final days of Alexander Lukashenko?
Well, I think we have to make a difference of what the people in Belarus are seeing, this brutal society that is protesting and what the president and his elites are seeing, because I think there is quite a huge difference there. So for me, it is obvious that the vast majority of people in Belarus do not see president as a legitimate president, so to say, anymore. I mean, it's not for the first time that elections were falsified in Belarus. We know that it has been happening for 20 years already.
You're being very cautious. Are these the last days of President Lukashenko?
These could be last maybe weeks, months, whatever, but I could still imagine a scenario where when he would, come back to the repressions, and a lot will depend on his communication with Russia. It's a very important factor now as well.
So there could be a return to the status quo of 26 years.
Not in that sense, maybe for him, but not for the society. The society has already changed, and he will never be that legitimate anymore as he used to be quite for a long time. But we definitely see that the relations between state and society have changed in Belarus. And we also see that, also on the level of local authorities and also some cases within the elites, people start considering if it's really the last days of him. So it's a very good question that you ask. I think that everybody in Belarus is asking now this question, and a lot really depends on what those people who are asking those questions now will do tomorrow.
And Gesine Dornblüth, you say you are worried for the brave people of Belarus. Why the angst?
I mean, I have been last time to Belarus in 2011, and there I witnessed already how people react, how Oman and so on react on very small protests, what I saw in 2011. And I mean, we saw the videos and the photographs from tortured people in jail in Belarus. And I don't know if I would be so brave as a Belarusian to go on the street today and to protest.
Especially given that you are convinced that Vladimir Putin is not going to allow democracy to take hold in Belarus. What makes you so convinced?
This is a threat to his own power, because Putin, he is an authoritarian leader, and he's said several times that he would not tolerate a regime change provoked by mass protests on the streets. Because if that would work in Belarus, this would be a sign, and it is already a sign to the opposition and to normal people in Russia that they could also, that this is possible not only in theory but in practice.
It's a big issue for Russian government because Russian government see what's happening in Belarus is a street protest, is a next in a row of mass protest in the former Soviet Republic, right? Georgia, Ukraine, even Kyrgyzstan, for years in Russia trying to prevent such scenarios in Russia. So what we saw in Moscow 2011, 2012, it was similar happenings on the street, similar mass protests with a huge enthusiasm from the masses. And Russian government and security forces were very professional in suppressing these protests. So I'm afraid, I hope for the Belarus the best, but I'm afraid it could not be the last days of Lukashenko in power.
I mean, Vladimir Putin has got a very long and interesting political biography, and there was a time when he sort of flirted with democracy. Do we agree that he now no longer does democracy?
Putin
he declared liberal democracy dead a couple of years ago in an interview with Financial Times. He pronounced liberal democracy dead. So liberals are enemies of the Russian state since even this street protest in Russia 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
And we have a big wave of state repression in Russia since that time.
Why then now, given this sort of this cautious feeling that you have been expressing, why have people been willing to go out onto the streets now? Why in such numbers? Why have they been willing to take beatings and be imprisoned?
Well, there are quite a lot of reasons for that, and actually it happened long before the elections. So we have to understand that the society of Belarus was politicized at large months before the elections. So, I mean, what we saw in the last week and also several weeks before with this new, female trio that were mobilizing people also in the regions, they just gave a new dimension to the whole protest moves, but people were already politicized, and that not at last due to the inconsequent information policy during the pandemic. So people were really not happy by the actions taken by the state. They were not happy by the expressions of the president himself, because he made really some victim-blaming expressions in terms of people who died from coronavirus.
For example?
For example, well, he told people something like, how can you live if your weight is over 130 kilos? Or why are you walking on the streets if you're already over 70 or 80 years old? He was talking about, the former actor in Vitebsk. This person was really well known. And he never apologized. So it's really, people were shocked. And it's one of the factors. And then we have also economic factors and new faces in politics, and it just coincided. All those factors are coincided. I think it's just, a destiny for Lukashenko that he had all those factors at the year of election. So people were already not content with the state and also very, very angry personally with Lukashenko. So they united under the slogan, everybody but one, which means everybody but Lukashenko. And that's why they were actually ready to give their votes for Tikhanovskaya, who is not a politician. She, housewife, a wife of a famous YouTube blogger. That is a sign for me of a very high protest moves in society. So people just don't care who, they just want to get rid of the president who is in power for 26 years.
Okay, everybody but one. Alexander Lukashenko, the erstwhile Belarus strongman, is, however, still in power. He only travels by helicopter these days, we're told. Let's take a quick listen to how he envisages the situation in Belarus developing.
We need to approve a new constitution so the opposition won't be against it. It needs to be approved in a referendum because our previous constitution was approved in a referendum. And based on the new constitution, and if you want it, we will hold new elections for the parliament, presidency, and local government bodies.
Gesine, what do you say, the prospect of fresh elections? Would the opposition accept the elections if President Lukashenko were going to stand again for the presidency?
I heard some, you told me actually
it's
before, maybe you will answer because you read this news about...
It was reported today that Marina Kolesnikova was one of the figures of the joint command of the opposition, declared that the Belarusian opposition would allow Lukashenko to take part of the new election. So the answer is yes.
Interesting.
But I mean, what Lukashenko said, I guess, is only he wants to win time. He is not willing to leave.
Yeah, it's all about momentum here, because tell me about how important the momentum is, because the opposition needs things to happen quickly.
The momentum was hugely important. You're completely right. It was dynamic of the first very dramatic pictures, which created completely different dynamics that 10 days later, because now we have like a kind of a slowing dynamic, and the numbers of people on the streets are decreasing. And the European Union took 10 days to organize a special summit on Belarus, 10 days. And yesterday I saw only 5,000 people on the streets on the Independent Square in Minsk, which is like very low number compared to the previous demonstrations. And the next one will be on Sunday, so 4 days without street actions.
Interesting. As we've already seen, there have been protests in the past, and very few people would accept that this is not a time for change, but some have been absolutely euphoric, and that's becoming a little bit more questionable as regards momentum change in the way that we've just been hearing.
This is incredible. We've never seen the people of Belarus this happy, this free. Belarusians, you are incredible. We love you. This shows that we're all united and that we want to protect our right to vote freely and stage free elections. The protesters are elated, but they have still not won. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has become their leadership figure. Her husband, who had actually been a candidate, was arrested. In a statement from exile in Lithuania, she confirmed, "I am prepared to take on the responsibility and the role of leader of our country. The nation must calm down. We must stay united so that new elections can be held." And the protests are continuing. Many workers in state factories and at state TV are going on strike. How long can Lukashenko hold out?
Well, the answer to that question will depend on how much the opposition can remain united. Is the opposition united, or is doubt beginning to seep in?
Well, I think we have to be a bit cautious when you say opposition, because it's not really, this classical party opposition that we think about when we say opposition here in the West. It's really a kind of a grassroots movement that we are observing now in Belarus. So, I mean, Tikhanovskaya is a former housewife, and then we have the representative from other teams of the most popular candidates. But this coordination committee that we are observing now, it's really not the, not this opposition that we're used to. So there are people from, people from civil society, the people from striking teams from the state-owned enterprises. There are just people, well-known people from Belarus, who have, gained some popularity, like Svetlana Alexievich, the Nobel Prize winner.
But do you, in your heart of hearts, believe that you have a leader, that you have a figurehead who can
still do not
draw this movement through?
They still do not have the leader, and that has been the problem till now. Well, it begins to be a problem, because before that it was actually more or less, I think, the opposition actually won because they didn't have a leader, because people learned to sort of organize themselves. So people learned to be solidary, and people self-organized. They self-organized through social media and so on. So it was okay for them to be without leader, and I understood that Tikhanovskaya is just a symbolic figure, a technical candidate. But now it could be a problem, because somebody should initiate those negotiations, and there should be some figure who also would be, seen also by the authorities as a serious figure, because Tikhanovskaya is not such a figure for the president, by no way, because he doesn't believe, in women power and so on. So I would say that this could have been this former Minister of Culture, Mr. Latushka, who is now in this committee, but everything is still at the very beginning, and we don't know if they maybe already have some conflicts within this committee. So.
Okay, you just mentioned women. Women have played a a very prominent part in the protest movement in recent weeks, taking to the streets in their thousands, often wearing white and carrying flowers. It's been a peaceful protest against state violence. Some 7,000 people have been arrested and in many places badly beaten. There's a lot of talk, though, about a new generation of women coming to the fore in Belarus. Gesine, a new generation of women in Belarus.
It's difficult to answer because I couldn't travel to Belarus the last years because I was denied a visa. But this is one point actually where we can also talk about possibilities of European Union, because the engagement, the context between European civil societies in European Union and Belarus, they were intensified during the last years. And I think this also has a kind of an impact on young women, on generations, how about women's rights and so on. This might be.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about young women. I read somebody saying that until very recently, the word feminist and feminism, the idea, you smile, yeah, were hardly used and were very often sort of negative categories. That is beginning to change, we are told.
Well, it's a very good question. I've been thinking about that for weeks. It's a very paradox situation that we have now, because from the one hand, we have a woman who openly admits that she's actually just a housewife and she is there only to help her husband come out of the prison and at the same time, to rescue the rest of Belarusian society from a dictator. But she openly admits that she wants to come back as long as, the new elections are there. But from the other hand, of course, this female trio that we've seen 3 weeks before elections, of course, it gave some other discourse to the Belarusian politics, because, women were not seen there as, some kind of serious figures. And Lukashenko mentioned it himself. He said that Belarusian constitution was not written for women. And, of course, some negative reaction came at once on his words. And I think it was also one of his biggest mistakes before elections, because people supported Svetlana and her team actually out of protest and out of solidarity. So it was not that much about politics. Of course, they also wanted new elections, but I did not think, of course, that the people saw a president in her. It was just, the sign of solidarity and to show, okay, whatever happens, we just on your side, and we do not agree with the words of the president.
Okay. One other point we must come back to, Gesine, because you mentioned the role of the EU. The EU has issued this statement saying we stand side by side with the people of Belarus. How much comfort will that give to people in Belarus or not?
I think on the one hand, of course, they need solidarity, they need moral support. On the other hand, it's very dangerous. And we see now that Russian propaganda already is working and doing their job, that they want to discredit the protests in Belarus as a movement financed and organized by some Western actors. This was said by Lukashenko, and also you can read this today and yesterday in all the different channels from Russian politicians and from state-owned media.
Russia saying the same thing to every so-called colorful revolution in the former Soviet Republic and in the Arab countries as well. So it's basically the same narrative from Russia all the time. This is sponsored by Western countries or by the United States, by the European countries. Regime changes on the way of street protests, not on the legal way by elections, but on the way of street protest. So it's from Russia.
It's been said very, very often. The protesters themselves, people like Olga, I'm sure, have been saying, this is not about being anti-Russian and pro-European. Absolutely not. That's the most important single point people have been wanting to make.
I think we have to differentiate when we think about Belarusian society and European Union. From the one hand, people expect solidarity, and this solidarity is already there, right? And there is also, some funds ready to help from the European Union to help those who suffered from repressions and the civil society support and so on.
But that is outside interference for Vladimir Putin.
That's why I say differentiation, because on the other hand, the EU should be very cautious not to make this impression that they are kind of coordinating also within this new public committee. I mean, they already offered mediation, or actually they themselves asked for mediation from the European Union. But I think this mediation observation, you have to be very cautious, because it could really cause a very emotional reaction from Russia. So if we are talking about mediation with this coordination committee, I think it would be reasonable also to at least try to invite Russia, so that to show that these protests are really not anti-Russian or not pro-EU or not pro-NATO, pro-China or whatever, that it's really a very internal problem of Belarusians that they want a new president. And the most important thing for Russia is that Belarus would not become Ukraine in sense of anti-Russian. And this is also not true. It's not true. Belarus is not anti-Russian, and it's better to let it be so, and not to try, bring this geopolitics within the society and to.
I think it will be very difficult, and I don't know if it really makes sense for a European Union to try to explain to Putin that they have no geopolitical interest, even if they don't have anyway. Putin already says that, and Lavrov and Russian politicians.
Yeah.
So they need this image of.
They might be expecting that actually from the coordination committee, maybe they could stress it once again that they are really not. I think it's problematic that they are talking only about the EU mediation. I think the coordination committee could also have said, okay, we're actually interested in the interest of all our neighbors is important. I think this is the message that Putin is still hoping to hear.
But is this, Vladimir, I wonder, is this episode, is this chain of events now, is it an opportunity for Vladimir Putin or a threat for him?
I don't see it as a threat for him. It's another one exercise in reaction of this so-called street protest or street call for revolution, because Russia exercising the reactions and making these reactions perfect for years, because the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine 2004 was a huge surprise for the Russian government and state authorities. So they reacted after this, and now they're collecting experience with this street protest, not only in Russia, but outside of Russia as well. So for them, it's like collecting know-how, how to deal with this kind of situation for the future. If something like this would happen in Russia, which is right now probably not really realistic, but they're collecting experience and know-how how to deal with this kind of instability inside of country.
And Vladimir Putin has become an expert in disruptive politics. How far do you think he's going to go in disrupting the Belarusian party here?
I think that the Belarusian government are getting support from Russia in terms of expertise, how to suppress the street protest, how to deal with this, not only to beat the people and not only to torture the people in front of the camera, but to deal on a more subtle way, more, how do you call it, more precise way, not too
precise,
not more precise way. So to take targeted way, to take out a couple of symbolic figures probably, or to make not the huge repression, not to put thousands of people in a jail, but act more subtle on the level of information distribution of the error. So
I mean, that's already what the Belarusian authorities already did before, long before elections. All the most important figures, all the opposition candidates or potential candidates, because they were never registered, and everybody who had at least some kind of experience in street protests, they were already in jail far before elections. So what we're seeing now is a grassroots movements, and that's make it problematic for the government. And just to come back to this Russia problem, because I do understand that, of course, for Putin it is kind of bad example for Russians to show, wow, people, you can do it yourself, right? But at the same time, I'm asking myself, what would he get? I mean, he would lose. As long as Belarusians would see that Russia is intervening, I don't know, military or in some other obvious form, Russia would lose the most friendly society in terms of Russia, because Belarusians are most friendly in comparison to other nations, and that's a very important soft power instrument, and Russia is already present there. Most Belarusians speak Russian. Russian media are still very popular in Belarus. Culture, church, family connections and so on, mentality also a bit and so on. So it's really, it will not disappear even as long as president is not there. I mean, Lukashenko. This dependence will not disappear. These mechanisms of influence will not disappear. Also, economic dependence from Russia is huge. So I don't really see the point. Why would he do that? Because he still can have influence on the further potential presidential candidates in the future.
A very quick word from Gesine, and then I'll come back to you, because it's very important that we do.
And you asked about threat or chance for Putin. I think it's also a chance for him what's happening, because the relationship between Lukashenko and Putin is quite difficult, and I'm not sure if Putin really wants to keep Lukashenko, or isn't it better for him to get rid of him, because Lukashenko, Belarus under Lukashenko didn't recognize the Crimea being Russian, for example. So this is one point also.
How do you sleep at night?
Couple of hours.
You've got family.
Yes, family, friends. My friends were already
beginning to feel despairing about the situation?
I mean, I began to feel despairing at the very first night. I was just, reading the news the whole night, of course.
We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. It's been a very interesting discussion. If you've enjoyed it as much as I have, come back next week. Till then, bye-bye and tschüss.